Welcome to Between Authors. I'm your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that author or book that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt for a reader. The goal for my podcast is to bring to you either those authors or those books that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today in episode 53, I bring to you author M. Day Kendall. We'll find out a little more about her, what she's published, what she's working on, and maybe what her plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, M. Day.
Hi, how are you?
Great, I'm doing great. I'm happy you're here today.
Yeah, I honestly almost didn't make it. The struggle trying to get everything together on this end with these children. But we're here now, so.
Okay, why don't you start by introducing yourself to the viewers? Give them a little background about, who you are.
I mean, I'm not that crazy cool, I guess. I'm actually a first-generation immigrant from France. I moved here when I was, 3 or 4? So English is actually sometimes feel like more of a first language to me than French. Although we weren't allowed to speak English growing up in our home, we'd get in trouble for that. And that's still the case even as an adult now. I don't know. I assume you speak Spanish, correct?
I speak some, but not as much. I was actually the reverse that, even though everybody was fluent, they all spoke English all the time. So I didn't hear it as much as you probably would normally think I would have.
Well, that's too bad. I figured, I don't know, maybe my family was just really weirdly strict about it because you don't see or find other French speakers very often. So we had to keep it in our little bubble so we wouldn't lose it.
Yeah.
But, we kind of lived all around the country growing up. I spent 10 years in Fargo, North Dakota. It's freezing out there. I don't know if you've been.
I haven't, but I've heard.
Yeah, it's freezing in the winter. I don't miss that. And then we kind of just jumped around. I lived in right outside Detroit. We went to New Mexico, and then I met my husband in high school, and we got married, and he joined the Army a few years in. And from there, we've kind of hopped all around the country, had 3 kids in 3 different states, and we're now stationed in Georgia. So that's been different because it is hot out here all the time.
You go from one extreme to the other.
Right. It's 70 degrees out right now, and it is March. So it's strange. Definitely different. Because we came from Colorado prior to this. That's probably the best place we've lived, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, in our free time, if I get free time, we spend a lot of time trying to make sure our kids aren't sitting in front of a screen all day. So we're at the parks, we're at the beach, we're swimming. They love going to the library with us, and we're a big movie family. We love going to the movies.
Yep.
And everyone says the cinema is dead, but I'd rather go to the movie theater as a family than sit at home and just stream something, if that makes sense.
And as you know, some movies are just better on the big screen, right? You have to see them on that screen. It's not the same. I don't care how nice or how big your TV is at home. It's just not the same.
It's the whole experience of, the commercials and waiting for everything to start. And, so that's become our Christmas tradition with the kids is we take them to a movie every Christmas, and they look forward to that.
Yep.
So yeah, that's pretty much all there is about me. I'm not super exciting. I like to read when I can. I spend most of my evenings when my kids do get to watch a movie, writing on my laptop and editing and criticizing everything, as I'm sure you did a lot with your own book.
That's the life of an indie author, isn't it? What that little bit of time you can find, you go write, and usually you're not happy with what you did write. You try to go through it and fix it.
Oh yeah, you read it back and you are like, what's going on? What did I write? This is terrible. It's discouraging, but it's been cool being on TikTok now because I've met so many other indie authors. I don't know if you met Zachariah Chamberlain yet.
Yeah.
His book was super fun. I read yours, and that was such a cool, different take on werewolves. because
Yeah.
I'm kind of werewolf obsessed ever since I watched Ginger Snaps growing up.
Yeah,
You
I love
know,
Ginger Snaps too. Ginger Snaps was a great movie.
it
Just
was
like you
so
said, I love the fact that they really took it a different direction and went, not only the female route, but they went more like a coming of age teenager route, but they did an amazing job with it.
right. All the angst and the broody teenage girls, and puberty hitting, and kind of how that all clashes together. It's
Yeah,
definitely one of my favorite werewolf movies of all time.
yeah. No, it's a great movie. I've always had it in my top five for that reason. Because again, I appreciated the fact that they just came completely out of a different direction for it, and they made it probably with like $50 budget or something, but they did
Yeah,
an amazing job with that movie.
they did, and I still try to get my husband to watch it, but he won't watch it for some reason. I don't know what his problem is. Every Halloween I try, but we end up watching, the classics instead.
Yep.
Can't be helped. But yeah, and then I also met like Tori Dawson. She's like super sweet. She hasn't published her first book yet, but she's writing usually romance, and I'm lucky enough that she sent me her rough draft, and I've been able to help her kind of fluff it up because it's just in the bones right now, where
Yeah.
there's no meat to it yet, but it's got a great storyline, and anyone who's sensitive and loves, stories about soldiers and true love is gonna really enjoy her book when it's out in July.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy how supportive a lot of these indie authors are. And I think it really goes back to how we all just understand the struggle of being an indie author, right? Trying to find the time, trying to find the funds, trying to do what you love, when you can in that little bit amount of time that you can find to do it. So there is a great amount of support in that community because of that reason.
Oh yeah, well, especially the funds. I don't know what you do to do your book money, but I spend an hour a day door dashing trying to make 60 to 100 bucks a week for whatever I need just with my boys between because I only work weekends right now because
Yeah.
like I said, my husband's military, so he's gone a lot. But it's pricey, people want money for promo, they need money for editing,
It's
Amazon.
money for everything. No matter what it is, somebody's
Oh,
asking for something.
and Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the publishing companies, they just take so much of your money, that you don't really make a profit.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, that's what it really goes back to. And that's the thing about this is really passion project for all of us because
yep.
we do it because we love it, not because we're making any. I mean, we probably can't even afford to go to dinner with what we make from the book. So we're doing this because we love it, not because we're actually able to pay for anything.
Right. And my husband will be like, well, how much have you made? And I'm like, I'm more worried about like, I want people to read it more than anything,
Yeah.
and to enjoy what I wrote versus like making anything off it.
Yeah. You can't, I mean, it'd be nice if it happened, but you can't, go in expecting that, okay, this is my second income. It's going to be, I'm going to be
Oh, yeah.
good for a while. You have to do it. You really have to do it because you love it, right? And that's the beauty, I really think, of all the indie authors because we all love it. We all love doing this.
But yeah, we all love storytelling and we're all kind of awkward, which is why these interviews are always weird. I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, I don't think any of us are professional speakers or, good at doing these interviews. So I think a lot of the indie authors won't do them. Like my friend Tori, she's just did her first one and she was like texting me terrified going into it. But I mean, she did great, but I don't blame her. The first time I did one of these, I was like, I was about to dip out before it even happened.
I mean, that is the challenge because I've noticed that a lot of indie authors are, they are not reclusive, but they are, a lot of it's inward. They're not very open. They're not, and that's the struggle because our marketing is unfortunately has to be on social media. You have to do some kind of video or something out there, and it's tough for a lot of the indie authors because that's not their thing, right? That being out like that, being open like that is really not their strength for a lot of them.
No, it's not. And then they want you to show your face and make these little TikToks. And I mean, we're all getting better at them, I'm sure, but it's like I'm not a TikTok person. None of us are. Like, you know, there are a few people I'm sure who are just, born influencers, but most of us aren't running out, getting hundreds of views, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
Gosh, speaking of, I literally just got unshadow banned. I spent 2 weeks getting like 30 views on each video. It was horrible.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
know.
what I don't know what I did to make the algorithm angry, but it
It's
happened.
hard. It's hard to even figure it out sometimes. Sometimes, I mean, I get a lot of things where I post something and they're going, "Sorry, this got taken down." I was like, "There's nothing in that video. All I'm doing is showing a book."
Yeah, I'm showing a book cover, or I mean, with a lot of my writing, a lot of it's kind of triggering. So I follow those rules where I'll switch the letters around or I'll put the little stars in, and it'll still give me the warning, and I have to appeal it every time, and then they're like, okay, you're good. But I'm like, why did it come up in the first place,
It's. I think it's impossible to try to figure out. Every time you think you know what it is, it's just something else happens.
Oh yeah, it's TikTok. I don't know how people make money off TikTok and get TikTok famous. They must know what they're doing
Why
because I
don't you
struggle.
let the viewers know too, so we kind of get a feel for you and your writing. Why don't you let the viewers know your influences, right? It doesn't have to be authors and books. Could be music. We talked about a little bit about movies. Could be anything that influences you.
So I'll just break it down into categories then. So, I mean, with music, I don't know how other writers feel about this, but if I hear a song and I like it, I add it onto my book playlist. I kind of make a music video out of it, like, and where it'll fit into the book, if that makes
Uh-huh.
sense. And
Yeah.
that kind of triggers me to get dialogue in. It's usually happens while I'm driving and I'm ignoring my children in the back. That's when I get that daydreaming done, or right before bed. That's how I fall asleep every night.
Yeah.
I'm amazed to get any sleep. But I'm big, like music. I'll listen to a little bit of everything except country, honestly. Um, Lately, like Sleep Token's been a big one. The Bad Omens, they've kind of been vibing with me and what I've been working on.
Mhm.
But that changes constantly, and I'm sure you probably can relate to that. You were probably jumping around from artist to artist or hyper focusing on one at certain points.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been similar to you. I've always been one that listens to everything, and
Hmm.
yeah, so it could, even when I make a playlist that doesn't have to go with my book, it could be all over the place because I enjoy so much different stuff. And for me, doesn't have to be strictly a certain genre or style. I'll just hop around because I love it,
Right.
right? I love those songs.
Right. And to be a musician, I mean, that's just, there is writing involved in being a musician, and such a big talent. My brother and all my sisters, they play instruments. My brother, he picks up an instrument, he can play it. I don't understand it at all. So I've always been around music like that. It just kind of skipped me, I guess, but I do have the appreciation for it, you
Yeah, I
know.
mean, I really have enjoyed. I personally haven't done really a playlist for my books as of yet. I thought about it. I may do it for the zombie one, but I haven't really done it as of yet. But I really love the idea, right? I appreciate the idea because music as an art form to me is very similar to writing, right? Because it's really the emotions and the connections for music to the listener and for books to the reader that whoever's creating is given. So there is a great correlation between the two, and it does make sense because that song for a book playlist is putting you into that mood or that emotion that say that chapter or that part of the book is doing, or maybe even the overall book. So I do see where it makes perfect sense to be together. I think it's just a perfect mix.
Oh, it is. And honestly, I don't know how you don't have a book playlist. I have to make one for each book and like have it there in case I need that push. But yeah, I mean, I have to have a playlist or else I don't get anything done. There we go.
Yeah,
I've got
it's interesting because for me, movies was the big one, right? And
Mhm.
when I write, I really see the story like a movie in my head. So maybe that's why technically I don't really go towards the music as much because I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it almost like I'm watching the movie and just taking it through as I'm writing, like I'm watching it. But I do see how that really could help. I may do that. I may start doing that a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a helpful like side tool, but I like hearing that other people are seeing their books or whatever they're writing as like a movie in their head because I guess not everyone does that. Like I said, I was talking to Tori and she's like, no, I just kind of I see words and letters and what I write, but it's not like a movie in my head. And I don't that just doesn't, I guess, connect with me. It has to be like a full-blown movie and I got to be playing these scenes out over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to, and this is what important thing I always like to talk about. It goes back to what makes up your author voice, right? And a lot of that is what you love and influences up to that point. And as you mentioned, just like me, movies is a big influence for me since I was a kid. So I think the
Mhm.
same thing for you, how you have the movie nights and you guys do a lot of movies. I think that's just naturally how your mind is drawn to it because we do have that love for movies. We do have that influence from movies that we've watched, thousands and thousands of movies over the years that you're in that mindset and it just makes sense that you're trying to write it.
Oh, it does. And honestly, movies like, I mean, they're just stories on camera, with actors. So it's just the visual side of a story, which
Yep.
I think some people movies resonate better with them because I meet people all the time who say they don't read, but they'll watch the movie. I mean, I'd rather read any day, but I guess luckily we have that visual aspect that other people can enjoy.
Yep. Let's talk about your book. I know you have a book out now and you have another one that's coming out. Why don't you give the viewers an idea about, the names of your book for one and kind of give them like a summary or a synopsis about what they're about?
It's always the dreaded question, isn't it? When someone finds out you wrote a book and then they're like, "What's it about?" And then you freeze. It's always the worst feeling. But no, the first one I have out right now. So what happened is I wrote 3 out of the 4 books before I even published the first because I was too scared
Yeah.
and I was too nervous about my writing abilities, I guess. I didn't want anyone to see it. And I spent 3 years doing that. And each book's fairly long. They're like around 600 pages each. Um, and I still have to write the 4th one. I'm getting there. But I put the first one out and now I can quickly back to back them. So the first one's called Ambivalence. Um, and I don't know how much I can say on here because it is, like I mentioned earlier, a pretty trigger filled book and it's
Yeah.
not going to be for everybody. But I kind of had the influence of like watching Halloween and thinking, well, what if Mike Myers, and it sounds crazy, was more obsessive with Laurie Strode? And it kind of like bloomed into something different from there. Because around the same time, I read Identical by Ellen Hopkins. I don't know if you've read that. And it kind of in my head just like intertwined. So the premise of the first book is trying to word this as nicely as possible. Um, it's a brother and sister whose mom passes away, and their dad kind of takes her on as a surrogate for their mother in like any way you can imagine. So that's where those triggers are coming in.
Yeah.
And it's about his obsession with her, her brother trying to protect her, but also kind of being set on the back burner. And I guess just like everything that comes with that kind of relationship for anyone who's been in something like that, you know, trying to protect your abuser, um, and just like those blurred lines that come with a long-term abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And then series just progresses from there. the second part is kind of like her going into adulthood and dealing with the aftermath of all that, as is the third book, and trying to actually find what it means to be a woman when she's kind of stunted in this childish mindset that was kind of like thrust on her after the years of abuse she goes through. That's like the nicest way I can put it, I guess, without getting myself canceled. But it is
No,
like a
I
dark,
think it explains it perfectly.
book.
So I think you give a good idea of what the storyline's about on it.
And there's there's murder, there's violence, there's all sorts of those types of things for people who like a little more gore and action. But I had to like write a trigger page for it. And unfortunately I had a few people not read it and dive into it and then message me and be like, I had to DNF this, it's too dark. To which I said, well, did you read the trigger page? And they're like, no, I just jump into books blind. I'm like, that's what the page is there for. Like, I don't know why you're telling me this, you know? But like, I mean, and I had a lot of like these weird emotions when people would say stuff like that, where I'm like, oh my God, did I push too far? Did I go too dark? But then I'm sure you've had these emotions with your own book, and then you're like, no, I stand by what I wrote, and I wrote it for a reason.
Yeah.
So you have to be confident in what you write. And
Yeah.
then I've had a good response. Like I've had a lot of 4 or 5-star reviews, people saying they can relate to it, that it was like freeing for them to read some of those emotional moments, and just the thoughts that they've had in their past, maybe with their own, past that they could relate to, but they never could say out loud, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it really goes back to, and I stand by this, is that there's an audience for every author's voice, right? So it doesn't matter, and that's why you want to be true to your voice. And like you said, you want to stand by what you wrote because that was your voice. That was your message for that storyline, right? However many books it'll be, 4, maybe you go further at some point. But you stand by that because there is an audience for that voice, right? And it's true. It doesn't matter technically what that message is, what that story is. There's an audience for it. Now, can you find that audience, right? That's what we all struggle with, is how do we find the audience to match our product? Because they're out there, right? When there's millions, billions of people out there, the audience is there, but can you find them? Can they find you? Which is always the challenge. And that's why you stay true to your voice, right? You don't, like you said, you start thinking, oh, did I go too far? Did I go too dark? The answer is always no, man. Whatever the question is, the answer is always no, because that was your message, that was your story, and you always just stand by it.
Right, and I've had to just remind myself of that, and I've always read dark, but, even with your book, with horror and kinda going the direction you went, some genres are gonna have less of an audience, and that's okay.
Yep.
Um, you usually have your diehard readers versus, like, if you wrote something like a straight romance, you're gonna find a lot more readers,
Yep.
people who aren't bothered, and that's okay too. It's just trying to find that audience, and TikTok's been helpful for that, so fingers crossed they don't shut it down or anything, like
Yeah,
they're
I
threatening.
don't think it's going anywhere. I think the whole thing was for them to force them to have to sell it, just so somebody over here is making the money instead, right? That's always the game plan is we need to make the money, not anybody else. So I think
Right.
that's what it's all about, just to get them forced to sell it, just so they're
Like,
getting a piece of the whatever the profit is on TikTok.
I'm like, "That's fine if y'all want the profit, just, transfer all my stuff to whatever new app you want for me, please."
Yeah, I know.
I'm just don't make me start over because this has been hellish for me trying to navigate social media.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
struggle, right? But it's interesting. What's very interesting, and I've noticed, and I don't know if you noticed that, is there is kind of a wave or a movement right now for indie authors, right? And their support is
Mm,
starting to gain a lot more than it was before. And that's because, other authors are making it an effort to try to support other indie authors. Some of the book talkers are making an effort to only read and review indie authors. So there's this wave of support that's coming in that wasn't there before, right? And it's actually kind of good time if you're an indie author coming in. Again, assuming that the platforms or the apps stay around or don't change, but
Hmm.
there is a movement that's kind of helping, right? It's kind of ground level, kind of pushing it out there, and every little piece that helps is welcomed.
Oh, I mean, and it's been great. Like I've met so many book talkers that just do indie or were willing to be like, "Hey, I'll review it." I have plenty of followers. Like, if they didn't have Kindle, I'm sure you went through this. You'd be like, "I'll just send you my PDF," and a lot of them just want a free read for reviews, and that works out kind of for everybody.
Yep.
But the traditional publishing route, I think the problem is right now they've been so selective that they're missing out on some authors who are really good, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, you look back at how Stephen King got rejected. I don't remember how many times it was. I just know it was a lot. And to
Yep.
think they would have missed out on him had he not been persistent is pretty crazy.
Yeah. And that's the thing about traditional publishing, right? It really goes back to, when you really think about it, you're never going to satisfy 100% of the people, right? And traditionally publishing, when you're querying, you're basically submitting to one person to read your work and accept it. So really, what are the odds of that? If it's not something that's really in demand right now, right? If, like you said, you're not writing in a dark romance, you're not writing in that certain genre of fantasy that's hot at the moment. I don't even know if they care how good your work is. They may just say, "I'm not interested right now," but it's never against your talent or skill. So it's hard, right? So yeah, and the other aspect is, say you do get through to a traditional publisher and you do get accepted, then you don't have the control you do as an indie author because they may want to change certain things, and that's not even your voice anymore, really. I mean, because it's altered.
Right. And my husband had even asked that. He was like, well, like, I mean, even if, let's say, your book became a movie or something, he's like, well, how would you feel if they changed things? And I'm like, I absolutely wouldn't want them to change anything, like ever. Because,
Yeah,
like we said earlier, you stand by what you wrote. You don't want to change things unless they just don't make sense.
yep,
Like you write everything you write for a reason and it has its place. So I'm kind of happy to have gone the indie route regardless, you know? It's just freeing because you can say what you want, you can write what you want. The only downside is obviously promoting and marketing.
yeah.
That's the struggle.
Yeah,
But
and what's interesting is even the traditionally published, they don't even do that much marketing for you either. The only good side is they automatically put you in the stores and you get on, say, their pages or stuff like that. But outside of that, they're not really pushing you that many other places either, right? So you're still kind of, even if you're Jersey, you're still kind of doing a lot of work yourself, trying to get your
I,
name out there and your product out there.
luckily they help with formatting a little bit. I'll give them that because my God, formatting was a struggle. And that was my own fault because I wrote on Google Docs before I knew not to write a full 500 pages on Google Docs because their formatting is not, as good as it would be on Word or on Libra.
Yeah,
I don't know what you wrote on, but I learned my lesson pretty
yeah,
quickly
yeah. I write
because that was
in Google Docs because it's easy for me to access and do it. But then I wound up transferring it over and formatting in Word and everything for the final.
it's gotten easier with the second book because now I understand even things like cover creation. My brother is a programmer, so he helped me. Like I took all the pictures for my book cover. I don't
Hmm.
know if anyone's seen it. Like I went to work and I stole a beta fish for a minute, and then I went home and I took a glass and then I broke that glass. So I did all those things. I just didn't know how to put it together.
Yeah.
So my brother did it for me, and now he's teaching me how to use Affinity, and I am technologically illiterate, so it has been a challenge.
Yeah,
But
I
thank
mean,
God for him.
it goes down to another cost, right? Because if you can't figure out how to do the covers and stuff, again, you got to hire somebody, and there it goes back to funds that may not be available easily, right?
Right. And I'm not sure how you did your cover. Either you are a really good artist or somebody helped you with it.
Yeah, no,
Either
I
way.
actually for both of my books, I actually spent the money for the cover, because yeah, I can draw personally, and
Yeah.
you know, in my writing career as I do this, I have a vision where I always want my covers to look like old movie posters, right? Old 50s movie posters for horror. And, you know, I found this lady that does that. And every time I've explained what I wanted, she's done it perfectly. So I was like, you know, again, do I have the funds that used it to do it? No, but it's been worth it because I've always had that vision in my mind is I want them to always look like old posters,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, my influence again is movies and, you know, horror movies since the original, you know, Universal stuff in the 20s and the teens. So I just like that old look and that old approach. And, you know, kind of some of my stories, like since you've read it, is more of the older approach rather than the newer horror. And then I try to throw in aspects that bring it a
Mm-hmm.
little closer to today. But it is more a little of the older style of horror stories or maybe even movies.
Yeah, and I loved your book cover when I saw it because it did give me those kind of old vibes,
Yeah.
like Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, all the old ones. Um, and even I can't remember the name of it, the graphic novels. I saw them in the library the other day that are all the old horror anthologies. I'll remember probably once I get off this call. Um, but even like reading your book was fun because I wasn't expecting, and I'm not going to ruin anything, kind of like that shift, where there's almost like a pack betrayal, if that makes sense, without
Yeah.
ruining everything for everyone. I
Yeah.
definitely wasn't expecting that. So that was really fun to read.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to, and you know, I want to do it differently. I just want to bring it different because, you know, when you watch horror for your whole life, which I have, you know, all the different genres, one of the things is you start seeing a lot of formulas in the movie, right? Where they
Mhm.
always kind of start following a certain formula. And the movie could still be great, but sometimes you're like, why can't you just change this one aspect? Why does it always have to follow this, even if it's well done? And I just want to make sure I'm always coming from a different angle from it.
Yeah, and that keeps things fresh. And, I think the movies that resonate with me the most horror wise are the ones that kind of did something different or really had a hard ending. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched one of my favorite horror movies was the original French, the Martyrs,
Hmm.
because that thing absolutely destroyed me. Like, I wasn't expecting it. It was definitely a different take on kind of that torture, I don't know what I can say on here, the torture corn kinda, subgenre of horror.
Yeah.
It just it's so differently and uniquely that that movie's always stuck with me. Well, and it's also a brutal movie to watch, but
Yeah.
it's always stuck with me, and then that American remake was just, ugh, ugh. I couldn't stand it, I couldn't finish it, but, the movies that kinda do things differently, like we said earlier, Ginger Snaps is another one of those.
Yeah.
That leaves a lasting impression. I saw another one, I can't remember what it was called, but it was really one of those indie horror movies where then you find out you think that the main character is just going crazy because she keeps having nightmares about her neighbor coming in and hurting her at night, and it turns out he has the power to reanimate people and bring them back to life, but he's also a serial unaliver. So that was a really cool twist. Just the movies
That
that kind
sounds
of
familiar, but I don't remember which one that was.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that's seen that movie, I loved it, I just can't remember what it was called, I'll have to look it up later.
Yeah, it really is. I like I said, I appreciate it. Even like we're talking about music, I appreciate music when it comes from a different approach or different angle, or they start mixing stuff up and just changing things up. I just appreciate that. I always appreciate when that happens.
Oh, yeah, and that's why you can kinda dive into so many genres and like and appreciate all of them. I worked in a clean room for 3 years prior to this, and we were all allowed to each have our own playlist on, I can't remember, maybe we were using Amazon Music, and seeing everybody at that table working the line and it would shuffle through everyone's playlist was always so much fun because I was finding all sorts of new artists I'd never heard of
Yeah.
in genres I didn't think I would like. So I
Yeah.
would sit there and have to write the names of these bands on my gloves in Sharpie so I could go to my next break and remember them. Because they would be
Yeah.
like, it was very
It's
monotonous work. So I'd have to like, I could sit there and daydream to each of these songs and get my work done. But then I'm like, I got to remember who this was.
so I know you mentioned book 2's coming out for your series, and that's coming out shortly, within another month or so.
Yeah. So since I had already written the first 3 books, like, and edited them, I just had to really go through my final edit, where you're running through and you're rephrasing things or you're looking at your dialogue. And that's something I brought up with Tori, the other author girl, a lot is when you're reading dialogue and you're writing dialogue, you don't write dialogue, I guess, the way, like, in a clean, professional manner, because people don't talk like robots.
Yeah.
So I have to like go through and fix little things like that. And it's something I notice like when you first write any interaction between the characters in your book is how mechanical your dialogue sounds and how
Yeah.
you have to go back and add pauses and natural breaks and all that good stuff. So that's mostly what I'm doing now is I'm just going back through book 2, making sure there's no plot holes, making sure it sounds realistic and that I like the way I worded everything. So my goal is to have that out probably beginning of April. I'm like
Okay.
200 pages into like the 530 it is right now.
Okay.
So
And
we'll
then
see. I'll do that and I'll probably let book out 3 out probably by June.
okay, so you're planning to release the first 3 all within this year?
Yeah, probably by June. Like I'm not going to wait to like release them. I'm going to just get them done cuz I want to concentrate on finishing writing my 4th one, which will be the finale.
Yeah.
Um and that's a jumbled mess of pictures and quotes and dialogue that I just copied and pasted into a document right now. So it's a mess.
Yeah. That's always interesting how all those things come together, and then you can start, putting it together. After
And I'm sure
after
much
you
like you go.
yeah, yeah, after you finish book 4, right? Assuming that's the end of the story, because as you know, sometimes as you're writing it, you're like, oh, there might be one other thing they could do. But assuming 4 is done,
Yeah.
do you have plans after that? Right? Is there a storyline, a genre, or something you want to write after those 4 books?
So after those 4, I like when I was writing the 2nd book, I did have one character I thought I would do a very short standalone for. But then I also have what happens is I'll write and then once in a while I'll get bored and I'll start writing something else. So I have another story I started that's kind of about a cult. Um, I'm kind of escaping that cult. I have probably 50 pages written of that. I have a whole fantasy series I want to do, and then I have a werewolf one that's going to be pretty spicy, and that's more of a fun one to write than anything.
Yeah.
And then I have about 800 other stories I want to write, so I'm just hoping I don't unfortunately pass away before then and get too old because it takes a long time to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it
I can
does.
imagine. I mean, that's
I
the
wish I
one
could just
thing,
snap my fingers.
and put it out there, right? Yeah, that's the one thing we all
Oh
have.
yeah.
Unfortunately, way too many stories in our head, or even sometimes like already in files.
Yeah. In files, at least the outlines are like quotes you want to use, and then you're
Yeah.
like, when am I ever gonna get to this?
Yeah.
Like never.
They
And
I will have Yeah, I will have on this video, up on the screen, I will have the cover to your books. So the viewers will be able to see your book covers. So as you were talking about them, they will be able to see the images. And again, hopefully they do recognize them when they're on Amazon or anything, so they can go back and check them out, or hopefully pick them up for you.
Oh, that'd be sweet. I can use more than 9 reviews at this point. I'm just kidding. No, that's
We all
okay.
can, right? I mean, that was the interesting thing. I did a 5-day free ebook thing for the werewolf book, and I sold over 100 books in that 5 days. I think I got maybe like 2 reviews. I was like, at least give it at least 10%, if you can.
I know it's horrible, and now I feel guilty because I read all the time, and like, why have I not been leaving reviews? Like, I feel terrible about it, because
Yeah,
when I'm not writing, I'm reading, and I read so much, and I've never been one to leave reviews, so I've started trying to like kind of backtrack that lately.
yeah, yeah. Because you start realizing how much it does help, right? When you start seeing that, and when the new review pops up, the numbers start going up. Because as we know, once you hit certain number of reviews on Amazon, then they start pushing you a little more on the
Right.
page. So every single one definitely does help.
Every single review, and that's another thing with the other indie authors, is supporting each other. Like, I did an ARC read for Bella Reeves, and I think, the first person to review it. And she was kind of upset because, she gives out these ARC reads for free, and only like half the people who got it like reviewed it,
Yeah,
which is kind of sad. Because I'm
yeah,
like, you entered that agreement, you should be reviewing it at that point. So, but fingers
yeah,
crossed people understand soon how important those reviews are.
yeah. I just actually finished my zombie book today.
Oh,
So
did
now I gotta go back and go through and check it. But I finished the story today. I have right now 20 beta readers set
Oh,
up
sweet.
for it, which is much more than I did for the werewolf one. But
Hmm.
I'm excited to see kind of what comes back on that side.
Well, I'm excited for that to be out. Do you have like a timeline for that? Because I'll definitely be there to read it when it's out.
Right now it's pre-order now because I'm planning to release it July 1st. But
Oh.
it depends on how quickly I get, because I'm planning to send the beta reads probably in another week or so after I've gone through this. And
Hmm.
just depending on how quickly that comes back, then, the final editing and everything, it might even come out quicker. But, I've set it July 1st as the hard date to release it.
Hmm. It's better to give yourself more time than not enough time and feel like
Yeah.
you're being strangled by that timeline.
Yeah. Because you could always move it up, right? So if you can't really move it back once you set that.
Right. And then people are anticipating it, and you're like, oh, I'm getting there.
Yeah.
I'll see. I'm sorry. And as
Yeah.
far
And
as
then I think,
oh, sorry, son. Sorry.
I think if you miss it too, I think you lose like your pre-order privilege on Amazon for like a year too if you don't
Yeah.
make all the dates that you set.
That's why I haven't even messed with any of that pre-order stuff. I'm too scared.
I know.
I'm a wuss. I'm such a wuss about everything. Is your zombie book gonna be like on like that kind of not shorter side, but like more like 200, 300 pages kind of length?
Yeah, mine as of right now it's coming out just about 300 in terms of pages. I kind of, again, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to keep it at that mid-range, right? I don't really want to go further because, again, I'm trying to keep in mind audience, right? And I know there is probably a big group of audience there who love reading, but they may get intimidated by the big books, right? The big, thick books with a lot of pages. And I want to make an effort to stay in that mid range, try to get the story complete in that mid range,
Mhm.
right around 300, maybe slightly over three, somewhere in there, but make it something so it's not intimidating for them to pick up and try, right? And maybe that gets more people into reading on that side, and see how it happens. You try everything you can to catch
Right.
the audiences and see what you want to do. But thinking of my experience myself is I don't I want to read other indie authors. I just don't have time. So for
Right.
me, if I choose to read something, it would want to be on the smaller side, some of that mid range, because I don't know if I have the time to be able to get through the bigger novels.
Well, yeah, and then it's not as big of a daunting task. I think that's something I struggle with is I can't write anything short for some reason. It's like impossible for me. I don't know why, and I applaud anyone who can write a story in less words because apparently I can't handle it. Like a blurb is a nightmare. Um, but part of my issue too is like my page count seems longer, but then I write a lot of more poetic kind of formatting.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever read like Ellen Hopkins, but it's that like sometimes a full line is literally just two words followed by another word, kind of like structured like a poem. So sometimes that will take up a half a page, you know?
Yep. Yep.
And for the sake of printing costs, I've had to kind of like, instead of stacking it on top, I've had to do it like to the side where I'll put like a big break between those two words so that it still has that same impact without, costing me $55 to print each book, and not making that page count seem so scary.
Yep.
But I've
Yeah.
learned, and with the other indie authors, I've learned too, is if they're on Kindle, I will read on Kindle because it makes them money, like
Yeah.
even if it's nothing, like I'd rather read there and help financially. If they don't have it out on Kindle, I like to get it on Word because I found out on Word with your phone, you can have it read to you.
Yeah.
hmm And I've been using that for my editing as well because even if it's pretty monotone, just hearing it like spoken out loud helps me edit it quite a bit lately.
Yeah. It does help to hear it back, right? Because you're stuck sometimes reading it so much, looking at it that you still will miss stuff. So when you hear it back, then you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not quite right. You'll hear the little differences that you missed.
And it's great. And even sometimes, like as a brag, like you'll get that sentence and you hear it and you're like, "Dang, I wrote that. I
Yeah, I
did that."
know.
So I'm like, that actually sounds good. Because 99% of the time, it's all criticism.
At least you have every once in a while you have, hey, I actually did that.
You're like, "Dang, gold star for me."
Um,
But yeah,
I,
I
re-
mean,
I
those.
really want to thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I love this part of doing this because I get to meet all the other indie authors and meet you guys, right? Because too many times on social media, it's just a message here or a comment here on our stuff. And I always enjoy this to be able to actually talk to everybody and really meet the person, right? And hopefully the reader sees the same thing, can connect with the author and their books that way.
I mean, even just like talking to you right now is so different from just the messaging we've been doing, where you can't get a sense of how that person is or
Yeah,
their personality. It's very much cut and dry, even with all the emoji.
yeah, I
So
know.
it's cool meeting you as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. I do want to remind the viewers that are watching this is I will have all of MDay's links down below. So the links for her books, website, socials, whatever she wants to share will be down below so you can find her easily on that side. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification so you don't miss all these talented, amazing authors coming up. Again, I really want to thank you for coming on today, and I want to thank the viewers for watching as well.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. This is actually